All right, Shabbat Shalom, and greetings. Welcome to Pursuit of Virtue. I think now we may be at about week 4 or 5, so we're continuing to go strong. Hope everyone here had a great week. Zedekiah, Shabbat Shalom. I know it was an extremely busy week for myself, but it's always a blessing to make it to the Sabbath and be able to recoup, do a little bit of just relaxing, spending time with the family. It's been an extremely busy week. 3 to 4 hours sleep a night, and back at it. But that's just where I find myself at in this moment in time. But as you can see, the title today, it is the hero's dilemma. Right, and it's really a consistent theme as of recent. Last week we spoke about the different stages of maturation a man might go through, and at different times being called to, you would say, be a leader. A leader, right? I don't use the term loosely because it isn't something that I see is defined by a title, but rather when you look through history, where you see Moses, you see Joseph, many of the great men. First and foremost, it was the example that they set. How they ultimately were able to conquer themselves and self-mastery, not be subject to falling to the peer pressures of sin or pleasure, greed, lust, and ultimately in conquering those lower stages, they then graduated on to greater things and being considered and remembered as whom we see them today. So I want to touch on this topic because I think any man, right, it's few and far between, but when you look, if you were to consider Malcolm X, ultimately the Messiah, that's the greatest example, but I think that's too high of a ceiling to try and recreate or use as an example oftentimes, though we try. But when you look at more practical examples in today, in contemporary history, who are revered, if you look at Malcolm X, if you consider way before then someone like Socrates, or the different people venerated in today's time, who most of us as Bible believers understand, if they were alive today, they would not have been widely accepted. And that's ultimately the dilemma that a hero, quote unquote, a hero faces. But it's not something they set out to be. It's not something they set out to be anyway, right? So that's really what I want to explore, the hero's dilemma, right? What compels a man, what pulls a man to follow this path, not knowing what's on the path, not knowing what will come, but something that is within a man that compels him to stand, regardless of what comes with it, right? Regardless of what comes with it. Something that's in a man, or certain men throughout times and generations, that compels them to stand. So today we'll be dealing with the hero's dilemma. So I have a PowerPoint, right? We'll go into a few different things. It isn't so much biblical, right? I want to touch on Plato's apology as well, and that was or Plato's defense in regards to Socrates. I am a believer through my study that Socrates was a monotheist. I know that can sometimes be shunned in academia, but I do also understand that philosophy, even the term, wasn't something he would have been familiar with. And even in the writings about him, some you see that he spoke of a spirit or a god that compelled him to stand for what he stood for. And even if he were to be freed or deemed innocent, he would not stop speaking on behalf of that deity. He was accused of going against the gods. He was accused of associating with terrorists. So if you consider those things and you go throughout any period of time, you would have to um, you would have to consider that. I don't know the ethnicity for certain. He lived prior to the Messiah, but the writings and the things that he said are what I would deem blameless. If you were to line it up, many of the things he said, he stood for, and you were to put that alongside scripture. So we'll go into a few of those things today and just get an understanding, right? Explore the hero's dilemma. So again, Shabbat Shalom. Yes, sir. Shabbat Shalom. Ricky, appreciate you, brothers. And yeah, we'll have a conversation. I may share the link a little later if you brothers are in a place to be able to talk. Elijah won't be able to make it this evening. So yes, today we'll be touching on the hero's dilemma, right? What a man is faced with. I don't know if it's a conscious decision that a man makes one day. He wakes up and he says, hey, I'm gonna be a hero, or I don't know if it's something that is going on in the spiritual realm, exactly what that process is, but it's something that interests me a great deal. And so here at Pursuits of Virtue, where we desire to transcend above just practices, which is important, right? The keeping of the law or holy days, but I desire something a little deeper. So I'm going to share my screen here, right? A slide, and we'll just read a few things to gain an understanding, hopefully, most high willing, and be edified, right? Okay, so this is the slide from last week. So let me see here. Oh, let me see. All right. One moment. All right. Okay, so I just saved it. All right. All right, one moment. I'm getting this pulled up here now. All right. All right, there we go. Okay. So the hero's dilemma, right? So I'll begin with Philo as I tend to do. It's always been something that's edifying for me, at least to understand the scriptures a little better, right? And so one of the chapters that Philo has, Philo of Alexandria, is allegorical interpretation. And he wrote this, and I think this will put us on the right track in understanding the compulsion in a man, and the desire that men whom we would look at today as heroes, something that sparked a flame within them, right? And it reads, and this appears to me to be the reason why the sentence which I have cited above was uttered. Day is an emblem of light, and the light of the soul is instruction. Many persons, therefore, have provided for themselves the lights that can exist in the soul against night and darkness, but not against daytime and light. Such lights, for instance, as are derived from rudimental instruction and those branches of education which are called encyclical, and philosophy itself, which is sought after for the sake both of the pleasure which is derived from it and also from the influence which it gives amongst rulers. So I'll stop there. Philo has a way of speaking, right, that I've become acquainted with through reading them for the years. And so what he says is, many persons therefore have provided for themselves the lights that can exist in the soul against night and darkness. So this would be a lesser light, but nevertheless a light. And he goes on to say those lights are, rudimental instruction, meaning it's a good thing if a man has an education, right? It's an honorable thing. It's something we deem honorable today. And even the branches of education, which are called encyclical, and philosophy itself, dealing with even religious instruction or the understanding of wisdom, right? These are good things. And he goes on to say these things are sought after for the sake both of the pleasure which is derived from it and also from the influence which it gives amongst rulers, right? But even then you could say, well, that's a good thing but not ultimately good or not ultimately genuine, right? If you desire to be well versed in knowledge or scripture, there's a benefit of it, no doubt, right? But if the ultimate desire of you desiring wisdom or scriptural knowledge is, for it says it's a pleasure that's derived from it, and it also gives a man much influence, right? So he says, now that's a lesser light, right? And he compares it to say that's a light enough to sustain light in the midst of darkness, right? So I'll continue reading. And he says, but the good man seeks the day for the sake of the day, and the light for the light's sake. And he labors to acquire what is good for the sake of the good itself, and not of anything else. On which account Moses adds, in order that I may tempt them and see whether they will walk according to my law or not. For the divine law enjoins us to honor virtue for its own sake. Accordingly, right reason tests those who practice virtue as one might test a coin, to see whether they have contracted any stain, referring the good things of the soul, preferring the good things of the soul to any of the external things, or whether they decide upon it as good money, preserving it in the intellect alone. These men are nourished not on earthly things, but on heavenly knowledge. So this is something that has always stuck out to me, uh, since I've read it, which has been a few years now, and it was quite mind-boggling, to consider, okay, there is a pursuit of wisdom that can be steeped in vanity, right, or in self will, because to live righteously, there is an honor in that, right? There's an honor that comes with it, as he mentioned, an influence that also comes from rulers, right? Prestige, people look, man, and will commend you for your honor. But he says that's light, but he calls it a lesser light, and goes on to say the good man, right? Let me go back to the slide here. The good man seeks the day for the sake of the day, and the light for the light's sake. And he labors to acquire what is good for the sake of good itself. So, meaning the highest level of maturation, the black belt in the world of wisdom or in the spiritual realm, is a man that is compelled and on a path to do good with no benefit, with no physical benefit, not the honor that comes from it, not the pleasure that sometimes comes from it, but good for good alone. And what really sparked the thought was really remembering, okay, Moses couldn't necessarily be considered a monotheist when he slayed um, the Egyptian slave, on the guy who was in control, right? Who was over the slaves. So there was obviously something like an internal justice, right? To where Moses knew, I'm gonna have to give up everything for the sake. He knew he was an Israelite, right? So it was the love of his kinsmen. You can say that, right? And I imagine many people love their people, right, to a degree, right, to a degree, but I don't know if it's so much to the point where in Hebrews it speaks about he He despised the honor that was afforded him in comparison to taking a stand for an innocent man who then, even there was no honor that came with it, because even the man spoke ill against Moses, whom he helped. And but so there was something there, right? An inner, I don't know, and so this is really what prompted this conversation, the hero's dilemma. Like, what is it to where in a split moment a man was willing to lose everything, for justice? And these are the people that after their death, which they usually die, right? We get to saying the good die young. And even in such a simple statement, yeah, I mean, the light came into the world, right? And the world perceived it not, because generally speaking, the masses of people, and that does not exclude a religion, right? Or a doctrine or an ideology. The masses of people are not going to be inclined to do good. And typically what happens is movements, religions, ideologies, at some point, they cater to that. They cater to the deficiencies of people. So the truth being the most powerful thing, right? Even if the men like the apostles ultimately all ended up dying, as I believe what happens when we look through history, the men that came into the world and were unable to be moved off of truth, right, or justice, or that which was right. They were unwavering in it, and ultimately they died. Right, they were killed, they were taken, but their movements lived on. And so these are things I constantly think about when I look at these things. I guess you could say from a place of maybe a political science, right? Because I believe it's a science to it. It's a universal laws to where if there's something that you start on and you don't waver from a belief, assume like the belief being correct, of course, or maybe not, because there's many companies and corporations that stick to certain principles and they have great success with that. And you don't waver regardless of the public opinion, the minds of the masses. You even seen what Jordan Peterson was able to do over the last few years, simply because he would not change his speech to accommodate people that claimed there were more than two genders, right? And he said, now I personally don't have a problem with it, but since you will compel me to do it, I won't, because it violates my free speech. And though you will tarnish my name, you will call me names, you'll paint a bad picture of me, right? I'm doing this for you, right? I'm doing this for you because ultimately I've read all the history books. I've seen how what happened in Germany, right? I'll use my words carefully. What happened in Germany. I seen what happened with Stalin. I seen these things, and I knew it began with this type of rhetoric where liberals are being used as pawns. But Jordan Peterson, on the other hand, was like, no, right? I won't do it. Even though on a personal level, if somebody asked me to call him something, I wouldn't mind. But for you to mandate it violates my rights, and ultimately I won't do it. So there's something in men, right, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of ideological belief, that causes them, few select men, right, whom today I'm deeming as heroes, to follow this path, right, for the sake of good alone, right? Death, right? Death, being disrespected, being tarnished, whatever comes what may, I'm not moving off of this square. And we know in the scriptures when it speaks of the truth being the most powerful thing. If some of you are familiar with fourth Maccabees, which is sometimes attributed to Josephus, it's not certain exactly who wrote it, but nevertheless, I think that really expounds on exactly what's being said when it says the truth is the most powerful thing. Because when the question became what's strongest, all of the things that are of great difficulty for a man to conquer were brought up. Ultimately, it described truth, but I would say rather wisdom and perfection. where a man has beliefs, but he comes to a place of bridling his body. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Mark. Shabbat Shalom. And he comes to a place of bridling his body and being willing to allow what he believes, and he's going to act it out, right? And so even if there are desires the man might have, his reason or the truth or that which is right, his moral compass, is able to overcome that consistently. And we would deem that a righteous man who's brought his body into subjection. So the truth being the most powerful thing. But I'm going to continue into another example, as I spoke of a little earlier about Socrates, right? Socrates' philosophy is something that has been shunned a great deal within the Israelite community. But if you actually study philosophy, you'll find that what philosophy started out as, similar to Christianity, right? The Messiah would have never heard the term. Similar to the early people that are deemed philosophers, though they knew nothing of the sort. It was so now today, you think philosophy, you think of like liberal kids discussing world peace, on a college campus somewhere, not knowing what they're talking about. But if you go back and you read some of the writings of Marcus Aurelius, if you read about some of the writings of Socrates, because he didn't actually write anything, right? But if you read Plato's Apology, a lot of these things are synonymous with the scripture and quite blameless. But through time, there were schools of thought who you would see Paul sometimes reasoning with in the book of Acts when he says, ye men are too superstitious. And I believe those were like the Epicureans, the Stoics. These were not the people, similar to today, where you have Christianity. It is not even the term true Christianity is not true, because it wasn't a thing. Christianity was the advent of something that could be widely accepted by people in noble classes when it was taken from the early followers of the Messiah, right? The early followers of the Messiah, and then it needed to be digested and sort of catering to the masses, because it was like, this thing is going to be too powerful, again, because it was founded on truth. There was nothing that these people who spent time amongst the Messiah, they wouldn't take bribes, they wouldn't fold. There was nothing you could do. So as a wise governor or would do, or emperor, they knew, like, we have to cater to it, we got to get on top of it. And you see it today, right? When there was like a conscious movement that may have started in a genuine way, then it became commercialized with Black Lives Matter. Now it's the thing to be. It's like liberal and quote unquote woke. You have liberals that wear shirts of Malcolm X with the berets on, and it's like, I think Malcolm X spoke worse of the liberal party and these things, and it just doesn't matter. It's a stupor, and that's typically how movements take place. So nevertheless, I do want to say that, because I know some people can be quite dogmatic if you bring up something like philosophy, but I implore you, read it yourself, right? Study yourself, challenge the things maybe you've been taught. But I'll tell you that you'll find that the writings, especially in a writing like Plato Apology, it's blameless, right? It's blameless. So to give you the backstory on Socrates, right? So Socrates was a guy who he would go stand in the way and he would discourse with people, right? And ultimately, Socrates, he said of himself, I never thought myself to be wise, right? But they would take me to the people who they deemed to be wise, and they would discourse, or maybe what you would call debate. And he would say, these people considered themselves to be wise, and they surely were not wise to me at all, because upon further investigation, they didn't really understand much about wisdom or the way things were, like in a spiritual realm, or what was most important. So he said, if they are deemed wise, then I must be, right? But I don't consider myself wise. This is where we get the saying from, if a man thinketh he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet, as he ought to know. Because typically when you come into what I would say, when you come to the door of instruction, you only find how much you don't know, right? And it's true. It's not It's not a fake thing to act bashful or shameful. You just realize how much you don't know and you're honest about it. But it's a fool that becomes wise in his own conceit, as the scriptures would say, or to assume that he has more understanding than he does, right? So ultimately what happened is Socrates was called to court. He was called to court because they feared that he had too much influence amongst the people. And also he was alleged to have associated with terrorists. I believe they were called like the 12 or the 42. It was some number of people who would like sneak in Greece and try and destroy it. And Socrates was, I think he spent time amongst them. So which further alleges that, okay, Socrates spoke. He said, there's a spirit that compels me to do this, so I cannot not do it, right? And that's what we're speaking about, the hero's dilemma. Even if you were to deem me innocent and grant me freedom and life, I'm sorry, but you would be wasting your time because I can't not do what this spirit compels me to do. And so it's a great story. If you get to read it, it isn't too long. But yeah, so Socrates, he's called to court, and rich people were fearful because they're like, our sons, they desire to follow him. They want to listen with him. And Socrates would say, the only thing I've told people to do is pursue virtue above all else, right? Wisdom and over the economy, over war, over any business practices. Let this be on the top of the list, and everything else will ensue. And for some reason at that time, it just was too much influence that they felt he had, and so they went on a quest to basically try and frame him, to either get approval to kill him or make him denounce the things that he said and no longer continue to do it. So I'm going to read this. This is out of Plato's Apology. I think this was page 7, right? So Plato's Apology or Defense. This is where we get the term, apologetics from, or defenders, right? And so this is Socrates, Plato's defense on behalf of Socrates, right? And it says, yes, sir, knowledge is power, indeed. It says, even if you acquitted me now and did not believe Antius, who said to you that either I should not have been brought here in the first place, or that now I am here, you cannot avoid executing me. For if I should be acquitted, your sons would practice the teachings of Socrates and all be thoroughly corrupted. If you said to me in this regard, Socrates, we do not believe Antius now, we acquit you, but only on one condition, that you spend no more time on this investigation and do not practice philosophy. And if you are caught doing so, you will die. If, as I say, you were to acquit me on those terms, I would say to you, gentlemen of the jury, I am grateful and I am your friend, but I will obey the God rather than you. And as long as I draw breath and am able, I shall not cease to practice philosophy, to exhort you, and in my usual way to point out to any one of you whom I happen to meet. Right. And so what he would do is he would just discourse people, and it was only under one condition. You had to stand on whatever you said, right? Otherwise, he would just shun you. And then it would just be discourse in the marketplace, but it would be so compelling to where the crowd started getting bigger and bigger. But ultimately, he was only telling people to pursue virtue above all else, right? So now I want to read Second Maccabees 6, right? Because I want to speak of Eleazar, because there was a similar, it's the hero's dilemma, and I think about Eleazar, because he was in a situation where they were willing to grant him freedom, right? So long as he ate the pork, right? Or it appeared that he would eat pork, and they would substitute it with chicken. And so you see the dilemma, right? That's in him, to where obviously you would consider it. And who knows? I imagine that day, he set out to go meet with people who were deemed his friends, right? He was known that the Jews at the time, they had an autonomous government. They were under external powers, but they were autonomous to practice their religion, paying tribute, so on and so forth. But again, right, when certain movements within other governments or lands get too large, they tend to, poke at it quite a bit. And so they wanted to calm it down a little. And they even told Eleazar, okay, you don't even actually have to eat pork, but just go before the people, right? Eat chicken. And you think of him as a regular man, probably has wife, children. He headed out that day. Hey, we being summoned here. We have a meeting. Maybe not knowing that today it would be a matter of life or death. And you see, there's a consideration there, right? And he says, me, a man in my old age, right? Should I go before the people and show an example of kowtowing to or submitting or bowing my neck to something that I know would be a detriment to us all in the generations to come, right? He could have lived on, right? As the saying goes, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, right? A coward dies 1,000 deaths, but a man dies once. But ultimately, when you stand on that path, if you would call it righteousness, if you would call it honor, so on and so forth, it's dangerous, because you can never be too comfortable, right? I was watching a movie recently, and it was a movie about samurai, and samurais, they operated with great honor, right, and submission to their lord, right, or their feudal master. And the situation happened where the lord or the master was killed through trickery, right, executed through trickery of another lord. And there were certain sanctions placed on the samurai. He had to flee. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do that. And when the samurai went and he spoke with his wife, and he's telling her, look, I have to do this, right? I have to go stand. I have to defend the honor of my lord, so on and so forth. And even the wife, she's like, I married a samurai, right? I knew what it was. This is the path we chose. When I married you, I knew there was something about you to where I would have had to be prepared for this, right? I would have had to be prepared for this. And so this is something, again, this isn't something that's specific to an ideology. Sure, I agree with anybody that the Messiah is Lord, right? The Messiah is Lord. The Torah is not done away with. Yeah, I agree with those things. And from there, interpretations vary. I don't think any particular belief alone qualifies a man as virtuous. I've seen otherwise. Actually, I've seen a great deal otherwise. So this is really something specific, an individual decision that a man makes, or we learn, or we get on this path of truth. And you can find yourself in different places in time where many people, it might be an organization, it might be a church, it might be, but something that compels a man, even in comfort, even in rank, even in position, to stand, right? To stand. And this becomes the dilemma, right? Of those men compelled with an internal fire, right? There's something, and before we get the Eleazar, I want to read something really quickly. It was a saying, and so let me read it here really quick, and we'll read about Eleazar. But this is something to me that I feel should be discussed, so ultimately we can desire and aspire to be similar examples, right? And it says, I turn right to it. It says, shall I, abandoning all idea of what will be of general advantage to the whole state, seek to please the ears of this or that man with an ungentlemanlike and thoroughly slavish flattery? I would rather choose to die than to speak merely with the object of gratifying the ear and to conceal the truth, disregarding all thought of what is really advantageous. Now then, as the tragedian says, now then, let fire, let biting steel come on, burn, scorch my flesh, and glut your appetite, drinking my dark, warm blood. For here I swear, sooner shall those bright stars which deck the heaven descend beneath the earth itself, soar upwards to the sky, then servile words of flattery creep from out of my mouth to thee. Right? Taking a stand on behalf of what is just, what is good, what is true, honor. You know, when growing up, we only seen it in the Asian movies, right? And it's something that before I knew anything religious, it was something of a great intrigue to me, right? Of a great intrigue to me. So now I want to go to Second Maccabees 6. I believe that it starts at 6:18, right? Second Maccabees 6:18, the story of Eleazar. Knowledge is indeed power. Yes, sir. So it shouldn't be too long today, but it's just something to think about, you know. Right. So it says Eleazar dies for his faith. There was an elderly and highly respected teacher of the law by the name of Eleazar, whose mouth was being forced open to make him eat pork. But he preferred an honorable death rather than a life of disgrace. So he spit out the meat and went willingly to the place of torture, showing how people should have courage to refuse unclean food, even if it cost them their lives. Those in charge of the sacrifice had been friends of Eleazar for a long time. And because of this friendship, they told him privately to bring meat that was lawful for him to eat. He need only pretend to eat the pork, they said, and in this way he would not be put to death. But Eleazar made a decision worthy of his gray hair and advanced age. All his life he had lived in perfect obedience to God's holy law. So he replied, "Kill me here and now. Such deception is not worthy of a man of my years. Many young people would think that I had denied my faith after I was 90 years old. If I pretended to eat this meat just to live a little while longer, it would bring shame and disgrace on me and lead many young people astray. For the present, I might be able to escape what you could do to me, but whether I live or die, I cannot escape Almighty God. If I die bravely now, it will show that I deserved my long life. It will also set a good example of the way young people should be willing and glad to die for our sacred and respected laws." As soon as he said these things, he went off to be tortured. And the very people who had treated him kindly a few minutes before now turned against him because they thought he had spoken like a madman. When they had beaten him almost to the point of death, he groaned and said, "The Lord possesses all holy knowledge. He knows I could have escaped these terrible sufferings and death. Yet he also knows that I gladly suffer these things because I fear him." Right. Integrity on the highest level. Indeed. Indeed. And this is something, it really interests me. It really interests me. I'm going to say something, and I really want to pick my words carefully because it's just something that intrigues me, and it's on a level of humanity, right? And so I would say it to this, and I'm going to, I don't want to like hit the algorithm the wrong way. I'm not all the way familiar with YouTube and how it works and what you can and cannot say. But we know what happened in 2001, right? The the towers, right? And just reading, right? So I was just reading maybe a couple weeks ago, and I came across the letter of the man who was allegedly behind it. Let's read it. Let's read it. And we won't read it all, right? We won't read it all, but you see that, and you read the account. Well, no, I won't read it. I won't read it because it's pretty long, and I don't know how to find exactly what I want. But there were accounts of. I'll tell you, it's definitely something. Like, I don't advocate for any uh deaths of innocence, right? Obviously, we live here in America, right? And in Jeremiah 29, I believe it said, pray for Babylon because you are there, right? Because you are there. So I'm not one to loosely condemn a land, right? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The righteous must stand like this in these last days, indeed. Right. So, and I'm not one to, just, loosely condemn or I just try and use my words carefully, right? But I do know that in Second Esdras, the scripture, I believe chapter 5 and 42, it says that the Most High's judgment is like a ring. So when I look at, different documentaries, I might be watching something on South Sudan, and you see the scorched earth, right? With the different geological warfare, so that have been placed on a lot of these people, and you like, man, where I'm at, there's a lot of Sudanese people. It's a large Sudanese population, and you sometimes you can feel for what they're going through, but I also understand the Most High being outside of time. um his earth, the earth is established in justice. So wherever you find yourself at a different time or point in history, and the nation might be on the receiving end, or the receiving end of a punishment, or they might be giving it out. It's all according to the Most High's plan, who that works for the ultimate good, right? For the ultimate good. But when I read his letter, and I read his letter, his address, because he said, I've read your media about me, and how you've used propaganda to, deem me as a madman. And he started going through, very intelligent man, right? He started going through the practices, right? He started going through the fact that women are sold in commercials. He started going through the interest, charge, banking practices, stock market charge, and he had a if you're familiar with them, he was a Saudi Arabian, and his family was really close with the royal family, and allegedly, right? Allegedly, the royal family in Saudi Arabia, they don't even admit how much money they have, because it would be in the trillions. That, I've heard it. Of course I wouldn't know, but so very successful, right? Very successful in this lifetime. He left it. He left it all. They distanced him from him. So this is how he ended up, I want to say, in Pakistan, and there was accounts of him to where, and this was the part that got me, right, where it spoke of bombs blowing up beside him, right, and he wouldn't flinch, and he wouldn't flinch. Not to say that the belief is right, but I also understand too, in the scriptures where it speaks of in Romans 2, people becoming a law unto themselves, right? So not to say that that's the ultimate correct way, right? When Paul said, thou professest that thou knowest God, you do, right? So he acknowledged the Pharisees were correct in the things that they taught, but he furthermore went on to say, but you teach one not to commit idolatry. Doest thou commit sacrilege, so on and so forth. So he was basically saying, don't become so arrogant or high-minded in your belief alone, because the people outside of you that do keep the things in the law, they become a law unto themselves, and those without the law, they perish without the law. Many of the commandments, when you go into the Old Testament, they weren't even all punishable by death. Like even the dietary laws, you go back, you can read the records. Nobody was killed for those things, because a lot of those things, when we say you perish without the law, the law was it was like it's like telling somebody not to drink bleach, right? Like the detriment, if you don't listen, right, it will definitely affect you more than it will affect me, right? It's really not my issue. So it was looked at as a favor to be able to enlighten a person or bring them to the way or to the path. But then it became inordinate, right? Where it becomes like, I'm losing sleep over what you think. And then it's like an ideological warfare. And that's really a Christian thing, right? That's really a Western thing. And the reason why, and you see it now happen a lot amongst the Israelite community, like a heavy force, that zeal comes from religious dominance in the early centuries. It had to do with military power. It had to do with occupation of Holy Land. So that was really a political thing that was masked with what you would call it's like a trick by like let me help you, like let me help you, like and they would go and they would act to different uncivilized different uncolonized places, and they would put it under the guise of helping, right? So that's that, right? To not follow the Most High is ultimately a detriment to the person itself, right? Not something for me to become enraged because somebody does not agree with me. That is more of like a mental deficiency or maybe an insecurity within a person. Maybe they don't believe all the way what they purport to, right? So because I've known people, right, that become very consumed with the convincing of other people, and I wouldn't deem those people the most honorable people I know, or really honorable at all. A lot of times people that are overcome with those desires have the most going on, right? So it's much more important to me, right, to just bear forth an example. And so I preface it because a lot of times throughout my past, I've been criticized for not speaking so critical of different religious practices, so on and so forth. But Proverbs 14:34 says, sin is a reproach to righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Righteousness is just like agreement with the law. So if a person agrees with the dietary laws, right, then they benefit from the keeping of the dietary laws. It is what it is, right? Right. It's just a job to warn the people. Okay. Right. So I say all that to say, right, to preface it, because I was just speaking about a more recent martyr in our time for his particular belief. And it's of great interest to me because for my belief, right, or for my practice, but furthermore for what's right and what's true, right, for what's right and what's true, because you may find yourself in a time where you stand against people that believe the same thing as you, right? Paul did, the Messiah did, right? And it's, you don't want to become in a place where you're appeased by position or influence, or you fear the words of the masses, because oftentimes what can happen is, like, when you take a stand, then you get psychoanalyzed, like, you're power hungry, or it comes from a lot of places. But the thing is, if you really consider the people who did something great, right, in the moment, that wasn't the intention. You weren't sitting down and saying, like, yeah, I'm going to be known through the ages. It was, no, what compelled them was the truth, and truth alone, for the truth itself. I can give you an example, and it's a conversation. If anybody wants me to share the link, I will. Just let me know you would like to come on, because these are things I think about. But I can give you a practical example. It's like years ago, Michael Jordan made a commercial, and he said, maybe it's my fault, right? Maybe it's my fault. Because today you take it for granted, all of the things Mike accomplished, right? All of the things that it was just normal. Like, if you grew up playing basketball, yeah, I'm gonna have some all-star appearances, maybe get an MVP, so on and so forth. And Mike is like, when I was playing, when I was working on my game, when I was trying to win a championship, hockey games were selling more than NBA games, right? Indoor baseball, like, the NBA wasn't even what you see it is today. But for the sake of the game, right, that's what that I worked hard. I just wanted to be the best. And so, but today you have children, right, to where they play video games all day, eat snacks, and say, I want to go to the NBA. But what they associate the NBA with is glory, right? Because right now I believe it's the most popular sport. So I take that example to say, oftentimes when we look at the heroes or whatever, we take it a superficial view to try and recreate that. But ultimately, it's quite the opposite. It's quite the opposite to actually be able to successfully accomplish something that's world altering or world changing. Instead of going bigger and badder, you go less and you go within, right? You self assess and then you say, look, for the sake of truth alone, I'm gonna just walk this path, right? It's like the tortoise and the hare, right? It's a slow path. It's a grueling path. It's like I have to assess myself. First, I have to overcome my vices, right? Drunkenness, lust, fornication, all of the physical things. First, I have to do that, and then I have to take it a step further and overcome ambition, envy, right? To move into a place of charity and service and selflessness. And this is a journey, right? Without desiring anything in return. But as you walk down that path and you just look down, you've been looking down the whole time, you look up, and then it's like you look back, it's 10,000 people behind you. But it wasn't the intent. So rightfully so, I think most people understand it because you hear it a lot. Well, man, when you look at all of the leaders or all of the great men in the scripture, they all have in common they didn't necessarily want it. And I think that's from a place of, I think good leaders actually understand what's actually being done. Because I mean, to just value your fellow man, it's like I wouldn't desire that, to be over you or to lord over you, or in cases, man, you see men being held in higher esteem in the eyes of a man's wife than the man himself. You know what I mean? And this is like, this isn't a way to be. When I envision the ultimate gathering or church or whatever, or fellowship or assembly or however it is, I imagine I just imagine it won't be that way. I imagine it won't be that way. I have an idea when you look at culture, when you look at elders, even when you look at, you can glean from many different cultures that have been able to do great things, and you'll see elders are typically represented as age men, almost recluses, right? Humble, the perfect example of virtue, even in the gatherings, right? What I really believe, for men to come together outside of the Torah and outside of the gospel, it's good to not have one doctrine, right? Because that will excite genius, right? Now, I'm not saying to just argue over everything, but it'll keep the level of scholarship and understanding of that being sparked amongst men, and that's all it ever was. Like when you read the New Testament, the old, it was never what we see today. A lot of these things, Christian dogma is very heavy, even amongst the quote unquote awakening. It is. If you just read about some of the church history, some of the councils that happened early on, even so, it some teachings we take even further than the church itself, right? But that's just that's a different conversation. I don't want to digress, but ultimately, the topic today is the hero's dilemma. Like, what makes a man? Everything can be okay, right? Everything can be okay. And it's just like, I have to take a stand, right? I have to go this way. I can't sit by and do nothing, right? Yeah, I can't. It's a dilemma amongst the men where even being willing to die, you come to that place to take a stand, for what's right. And I believe it's it's truly the start of it is just a desire to desire good for the sake of good itself, shaking off the stains of self-will and ambition for and just really looking within and pursuing good, right, for the sake of good itself. Wisdom for the sake of wisdom. I was once told an analogy where there's two types of people that operate with wisdom. One can be compared to a man that has invited you to his home for a feast, and he keeps bidding you to drink, and he has a nice home, but the whole time he's talking your head off. He's showing you, look, I got this, I got that, and it becomes just so overwhelming to where it's like whatever good it could have been, right, it's been taken away because you've been quite overbearing, like a bad host. Whereas the other one is like a man who's welcomed you into his house. He has a good play, good music, a good symphony, orchestra, and he served you, and then he's took his seat, right? And he's took his seat as the rest, right? And just and just allowed you to take it in for yourself. And that's how we properly bear wisdom, not to be overbearing or to desire the person to see us in a light as an oracle, but rather as a servant, so you can partake of what has benefited me as well. And so this is now when we transcend above religious practices such as, a holy day. And these things are true. These things are true. And I hold them in great reverence. You know what I mean? I do. But it's more than that. And we can't stop there, right? This is why this class is the pursuit of virtue, where we look at character, integrity, right? A man being finer than the gold of Ophir, honor, right? This is where culture, can be restored, where men can go, off grid and be governed by an external force or an external power. So trust can be, established. Trust can be established. I've seen it. I've been in the truth. Or the quote unquote truth, right? But some of the best people I've met and some of the worst people I've met. So we can't keep it on a plane of just belief. A lot of this becomes a quest of, finding out the next newest doctrine to gain a degree of esteem, amongst the masses, or whatever the case might be, But now, this class is to compel one to pursue virtue, right, for the sake of virtue itself. So let me see here. I'm going to share the link if anyone wants to come on and talk. Right. So Ricky J says, great men understand that leadership is a high responsibility, to have a balanced outlook on the intricate details of how to treat people and making the tough calls always based on righteousness. Yes, sir. Yeah, indeed, man. Indeed. How to treat people. It's such a, if I could explain, I envision, right, a society where, or if you would call it a society, a community, right, where there's a balanced eldership, right, age. When you consider it, it would be, it's of great importance, of the highest esteem, the men that stand in the stead of the Most High. But within a society, if you were to look at, I really can only go to Islamic societies because they're really the only religious ones. Or I mean, you could look at potentially. No, I really probably couldn't compare it to Judaism. I probably couldn't do that. But you have a place where you have your imams, right? But then you have your scholars, right? And then men, a man alone, right? You operate autonomously. It's not it's really to where when you go to the gathering places or the Sabbaths, this would be a place where virtue is taught, right? Where virtue is taught, instruction on how we dwell amongst one another, greater, but not to, um, I think when you deal in terms of doctrine, that's something that should be dealt with, not um on a more scholarly level, where disagreement can be welcome, right? Where we going through the scriptures, and it's not so much I just impose my view on something based on, quote unquote, the spirit, but rather a more academic approach. Um, and the reason I say that is because one of the greatest things I've learned, right? Because I taught myself how to read Hebrew. Well, I won't say I taught myself, but I created my own curriculum. And the first thing when I did that was, I when I started to understand, I more so became afraid, because I said, "Wow, this isn't a science, right? This is something to where this is heavenly." In the prologue in Sirach, he says it. He says it's very difficult to translate things. He says, "So I implore you, right, if you desire learning, to try and go back, because even like a go-to is that we go to the Strongs, right? And then we just look up definitions. But even then, it's not saying that the word means whichever one of these things you think fits, right? It's saying it can mean all of these things. And depending on the verb tense, that determines what it is actually being conveyed. So oftentimes, someone might go into the Strongs and you might look at the A definition and you might say, okay, nah, in the Blue Letter Bible, actually, on a deeper level, it means C definition. And it's like, no, that's actually incorrect. The verb tense around it, when you're reading it in Hebrew and you have three different verb tenses, that determines what it's actually displaying in that context, right? If it's in this particular content, something that is concrete, is it something in tangible, like is it figurative, is it literal? And it's something that really open to me, that how some of these things can be left to like disagreement, and you don't know for sure, and it's definitely a humbling thing. So that is why I say certain things have to be interpreted. You can't just forego um like academic approach and say, oh, well, it's the spirit, and if you don't agree, it's not the spirit, because oftentimes it's really just it's the translator more than anything. Like, that plays a great part. And not to say they don't mean well, right? And even when you even like, with the King James, who I read the King James Bible as well. It's not the only one that I read, but even when you have various translators, it can still be subject to the influence of the people, right? Similar to today, if you've met one liberal, you've met them all. You know what I mean? You've met them all. So if you met one conservative, pretty much, you've met them all, and it can vary a little. You know what I mean? So it's like the same way. So if you get 10 liberals and you ask them a question in a different room, they'll give you similar responses. So eventually, I hope to, you hope to get to a point where you can just sort of do the interlineal Bibles and maybe parse them yourself. But that's something to where you really don't want to overstate what heresy is, right? You don't want to overstate what heresy is. But as I was saying, in that society, you want it to be balanced, amongst elders. You want to promote, being challenged and discourse for the ultimate good, which is edification, right? For the betterment of the people. But you do want the people to be rooted up in virtue and a culture established. You want to empowerment, in autonomy, right? You want that. So that's something that has compelled me when I said, man, it's definitely something where you would desire sometimes to just, raise your family. My family's large, it's getting larger, what I mean, sons, daughters, and it's a beautiful thing, and I thank the Most High for it. But the desire in me that compels me to want to help and want to establish it, right? The hero's dilemma is that I want my sons to have wives, right? Honorable ones, right? And you want your daughters to be with men you can trust. You want to establish lands, and for whatever time we have left, be in a place where we can grow in truth without external influence, liberal influences, which ultimately will affect our children. Something that really dawned on me, a conversation I was having a couple years ago, was me and a couple brothers, we were reading Wisdom of Solomon 7, and we're like, well, man, Solomon would have understood anything, right? Like he would have been like a Nikola Tesla. He would have been like, an Einstein. But what was so awesome is that um even if Solomon did, it all would have been balanced with the care of the earth and not destroying it for future generations. So when you look at that, and then people in the West say, well, we've accomplished more in the last 100 years than we've accomplished since the dawn of civilization, with destruction, though, you know what I mean, with different things that have hurt the earth, with over consumption, right? New companies, capitalism, which it's like, look, get as much fish out of the water as you can, don't worry about it. Look, we trying to build a $1 billion company, so on and so forth, with no regard. You can profit off of the adult entertainment industry, ruining men's minds, right? Different pharmaceuticals, the different side effects. So all of these things, when you look at society and what would compel a man to stand for truth. For myself, I could say, at least at this point in my walk, that's my desire, right? To do a good, because I look at my children and I want to see young men, with honor and esteem, more than just on a holy day, putting them on a garment, but with no true, character or really understanding of the way things are. So, indeed, destroying while building is counterproductive. Absolutely. Right. And so, my children is what, my family is what, the things maybe I wish somebody would did for me is what inspires me to do something if I can. And I can't ever, what's driven many of my decisions is, could I ever bear my sons looking up at me, seeing me bowing my head to something I didn't agree with, or, giving flattering, speeches or words to a man in a position or any idea, because I was appeased by, maybe a position or influence, or I was afraid of, what came with it. And I just said, I couldn't bring myself to that, I couldn't bring myself to that. And so that's been, and so I could see with Eleazar, right? I'm not at a place now where, Eleazar did it for all of us, right? All of the young men at the time. But I can definitely relate for my own sons, right? Even my nephew, I remember I have a ruptured Achilles, from when I used to play sports, and I trained boxing, but I haven't gotten surgery yet. And I still would train fighters, and we went to Turner Boxing Gym. I don't know if any of you seen the Netflix documentary Counterpunch, and I wanted my nephew to go there and get some work, right? Get some work with the top guys. And I was on the bag, and John Brown, he's the director of amateur boxing. He was like, hey man, you look like you know what you're doing. I got somebody for you. And at the time, at the time you think like, well, I wasn't here for that, right? But then I just looked at my nephew, and my nephew was looking at me, and I was like, all right. I was like, all right. But in my mind, I'm thinking, man, but I'm just not that type to say, oh, my Achilles, I'm just thinking that. And so like, and I just thought of him, I thought of him, and I thought of what he would think. And this was before I had sons. And so, that same type of spirit, to where it's just like, you think of them, you think of the future, you think of us being deprived when we, you might have been amongst Muslims or honorable people, and we were like, what do they call us? The Muslims used to call us one thing, kafir, the Jewish people called us goyim. and we just didn't have a culture, man. We didn't even learn, how to. I speak for me in the community I grew up, didn't know how to properly eat with manners. I remember times playing basketball on travel teams, being in a 5-star restaurant, getting up, walking out, going to McDonald's. You know what I mean? Just not really knowing anything, and these are things to where there wasn't anything I could do about it. I didn't know. So now being older and understanding a rich culture, and it's even better when we allow the practice, the cultural practice to meet the virtue and the integrity. And I'm like, man, though in some ways, I won't be able to enjoy it. I want the next generation to be able to. So this is what causes me and compels me to stand as much as I can. Right. Ricky J said, basically an environment of healthy competition to push the hunger of being the best. So whatever it is we do, it'll be blessed beyond measure. This is how a group becomes the best, by keeping the Most High first. Indeed. Man, last week we spoke about true leader is servant, man. True leader is servant. And you really have to ask, man, in all humility, right? I don't think that's something that has been realized yet. I don't. Or not on a grand scale. It's like, I'm gonna share this link if anyone wants to come in, but it's the video. And the only reason I'm mandating the video, because y'all know on some of those some of those calls with Elder Gabar, those, some kids come in and man, it just gets wild. So servant, man. What is that? What is that? To serve truly. To serve truly, man. I mean, this here, I can come on, I can, you could talk about the scriptures, you can have people, praise you and thank you. And, I've been there. I've done that. I mean, I've been there. You understand? But it was just, it wasn't enough. You understand it? It wasn't something, I'm on a different path. I'm on a different path, and I desire culture, integrity, virtue. As I grow in mine, I desire to be amongst people doing the same. I desire to be amongst people doing the same, and in truth, the spirit of servitude. So I shared the link. If anybody does want to come in, I know it's late. I know some people aren't that comfortable with it, but it's really just a conversation. It's something to, it's just something to talk about, man. I really desire to go past this idea of arguing about doctrines, right? Which we know little about, right? Because it's through time, we don't know it all, but there are things we do know. And right, this is the pursuit of virtue. This is the pursuit of virtue, and I love to talk about those things too. I love to speak about those things too, but I desire character, integrity. And earlier we read, right, while you all are thinking about coming in, I see a few more people have come in. So I just want to read again, what Philo mentioned, right? Seeking good for the sake of good. Okay. And I'm gonna read this again to just give an overview, a little bit of the conversation we're having, right? And it says, and this appears to me to be the reason why the sentence which I have cited above was uttered. Day is an emblem of light, and the light of the soul is instruction, right? And we see that example in the scriptures all throughout, right? We know the Most High is not something we can perceive. We don't know what we call it, the Most High God. We don't know. We really don't know. We can't perceive it, but the scriptures do something that's called anthropomorphism, or in a roundabout way, you could even call it personification, where the Most High wrote to us, right? He inspired people to write to us where he's attributed human characteristics, but he's much more than a human. He is not something that we can perceive. And so you see and understanding um, the spiritual realm oftentimes is compared to things we know, right? We know like light deals with sight or being able to see or guidance, all the things that light represents, right? So it says day is an emblem of light, and the light of the soul is instruction. And so we see the path, right? Let the commandments be a tinklet to your feet, and you know the straight and narrow. All of these things speaking about the path. And so it says, and the light of the soul is instructions, right? Many persons therefore have provided for themselves the lights that can exist in the soul against night and darkness, but not against daytime and light, right? So he's saying people have a light, which is a lesser light that can light your path, that can exist in your soul against night and darkness, but not against daytime and light. Such lights, for instance, as are derived from rudimental instruction and those branches of education which are called encyclical, and philosophy itself, which is sought after for the sake both of the pleasure which is derived from it and also of the influence which it gives amongst rulers, because it is a pleasurable thing even just to talk about the scriptures. Doing this right now is fun, but it doesn't make me an honorable person, right? And then it says, and also the influence which it gives among rulers, right? You gain an esteem for you gain esteem amongst people naturally, right? People honor people with wisdom, right? But then he goes on to say, but the good man seeks the day for the sake of the day, and the light for the light's sake, and he labors to acquire what is good for the sake of the good itself, and not of anything else, right? So to be true, right? To be true, okay, um, for the sake of good and for the sake of virtue itself. And so that has been the inspiration for many great men whom we know and venerate today, right? But as we spoke of, that it wasn't something necessarily to where when they were alive, they just woke up one day and said, hey, I want to be known, right? I want to be known forever, right? Or I want my name to, I want people to think of me. It wasn't that. It was just a pursuit of truth to stand for what was right, even when we consider Malcolm X, who was a great man. And you see what he went through, and just speaking up, first and foremost against the faction he was a part of due to some inner things that were unjust. And then furthermore, through different study, I think he found that traditional Islam was the truer path, at least in his eyes. But he dealt and he quoted the Bible a great deal. And oftentimes, right, if I'm honest, and I think and I implore brothers to become truly familiar with Christianity, not the doctrine, right, but Christianity itself, because you'll find a lot of people that denounce the Bible, so much so when you bring to them maybe our belief, you'll find that what they find, and I'm finding more. I can tell you a lot of my pursuits had really just been to understand Christian doctrine rather than Christianity itself. You'll find, man, I see why people don't accept it. Right. I see why they don't. Even the term Christ itself is an epithet, but that's a Greek thing. These things. So to say these things, if a person is familiar with a lot of these things, you would say, well, no, that is a Greek's religion, so on and so forth, because there were many Christs. And now the narrative that they believe of the Messiah, we don't ascribe to it, but to become more familiar with it as I am. Right. As I've been, recently I got a book, and it was about the Ebionite gospel of Matthew, and how in the 4th century, the Ebionites were faced with death in order to stop producing it. in their translation, there is no virgin birth, right? There is no virgin birth, right? Because even when you explain the virgin birth, Matthew 1 makes that extremely difficult to do because it does support a virgin birth. There's a different genealogy there. And in the 4th century, they were threatened with death. They were threatened with death or to stop, advocating for that. So, yeah, the Magi, right? That's those are Zoroastrian priests. That's a different religion. So a lot as we become familiar with these things, knowing what's in the Bible as well as the history surrounding it, it can be, a greater conversion method, and we don't become so dogmatic or angry, when having these discussions, because a lot of times, some things that are opposed are reasonable, are reasonable, upon further examination. So, that's really what I have to say. I didn't have much. It was an extremely busy week for me. So I just put some things together because these were thoughts I was having after last week's lesson that I really just wanted to go into, and so I put this together quickly. I went back through some things I've read in the past and just wanted to have a conversation. I do hope, all of you brothers here right now, and I appreciate you. I thank you. You could be anywhere. It's the Sabbath, it's Friday night, and just to be able to have a conversation. Hopefully, in the future, you all feel more comfortable. Coming on, just throwing on a t-shirt or something. And we have a dialogue. But I hope you brothers, as well as I hope for myself as well, that we do reach that place where we've mastered ourselves, right? Because that's the first step. That's the first step. Self-mastery, conquering your vices, right? Conquering your vices. You cannot set out on the path of a hero, right? And not be able to be an example of those you are called to save. You can't save the world before you save yourself, right? You can't save the world before you save yourself. That's the first step, right? Then the pursuit of virtue, right? And then from there comes solutions, on a mass level. Once you've mastered yourself, you've mastered your home, acting as a governor on a smaller scale. You've built up the people that were committed to your trust. By default, the next step becomes, going out into your community, as the scripture says, the fatherless and the widows, to take care and to look after them. This is religion undefiled, right? That desire to serve and to help. And we have to look beyond and outside of looking to just recreate the idea of being quote unquote spiritual fathers to everybody we come into contact with, and then calling that a form of servitude. No, it always isn't. One of the professions I commend the most was always teachers, especially teachers that go into the inner city, because it's people that will thank you later, and people that often despise you, but it's a great service. It isn't celebrated enough, so I look, we got to look to do that, to improve in our humanity, our care of others, so that we can serve them in truth, ultimately for the edification, which ultimately means for the service of another outside of myself, right? Outside of a person maybe thanking me. Children is the greatest example. Children is the greatest example because you wake for him, like the scripture say, the father waketh for the daughter when no man knoweth, right? Nobody knows, but for her protection, for care, we do great things, to preserve our children. So yeah, that's where we at with it. So I pray for you brothers, and I hope that if whatever you're dealing with, if you have the strength to overcome it, to be set on the path to reach your maturation, accomplish, and reach your potential. That's what I pray for you, brother. So if that's it, if there's no questions, no comments, I'll get ready to shut down the stream. All right. Well, brothers, it's been a good one. Another one, right? Pursuits of virtue, right? Class 4 or 5. May it be the Most High's will we continue at it. All right. And so with that, I say shalom. Enjoy the rest of your Sabbath. Rest well. Shalom. I need some guidance. I'm gonna play some music on the way out. Shalom, brothers.
Please accept me, pray you don't forget me, hope you don't reject me, I can come correctly, please accept me, yeah, please accept me, yeah, please accept me, pray you don't forget me, hope you don't reject me, I can come correctly, please accept me. Please accept me, yeah. Heart full of contrition, asking for forgiveness. Yeah, 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 yeah. Man down, face down, stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray to you. Feet down, teeth down, seat down, whip down, kick down, don't know what to say to you. Man down, face down, stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray to you. I need some guidance. Endure, keep fighting. I know what a light is. I must keep trying. Stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray to you. Feet down, teeth down, seat down, whip down, kick down, don't know what to say to you. Man down, face down, stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray to you. Oh, please receive me. Please receive me. Please receive me as I am. Some guidance, won't give up, I'm trying. I have decided I'm no longer fighting. Oh, man down, face down, stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray to you. Feet down, teeth down, seat down, whip down, kick down, don't know what to say to you. Man down, face down, stay down, kick down, whip trying to pray.